happy to be here with you for the 5th year in a row at Marie-Claire Power Trip in Athens to have a conversation about something that's very important, especially in the current moment. You know, and the word is peace. It can feel a little bit like a joke, you know, when you ask someone what's the most important thing to you and they answer world peace and everyone rolls their eyes. Well, we're actually going to have a conversation about world peace. So, brace yourselves. So Tonni Ann Brodber, the speaker I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to introduce you to, is the head of Secretariat of UN Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. What that means, she will tell us in a moment. She has an impressive career of advocating for women and championing women's rights in many countries, including countries in the Caribbean, Haiti, the Pacific, South Africa. Through her work with the fund, which she has joined exactly a year ago, she has taken her advocacy global. Together, we will discuss war and peace and how it affects women more specifically, and even more specifically, how women can be an instrument of change. So please, welcome to the stage, Tonni.
Thank you.
Sorry. So, Tonni, you are head of the Secretariat for the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. What does that mean exactly? And can you tell us what drew you to this position and this fund?
Sure. I mean, I work for the United Nations, and that is something I'm still very proud of, because I truly believe in multilateralism. Before, it was very difficult to tell people what I did, because I was the head of UN Women for the Caribbean. And even my family would say, well, what does that mean? I can say very clearly, working for the Women Peace and Humanitarian Fund is about ensuring that women, wherever they are, especially in terms of conflict and in times of conflict, have the funding, have the support that they need to survive, to provide livelihoods for their family, and also to advocate on their own behalf so that they get the change needed for peace.
So before we get more into the weeds of all that, we are, Marie-Claire is also a fashion magazine, and I can't help but notice the amazing dress that you're wearing. Can you tell us something about it before we go more into
the depth of
like saving the world?
Yeah, so I'm wearing a dress from The Cloth Official. I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, which is the land of Calypso. And when I heard the Madame President speak about her cat being Calypso, I thought, oh, the links. It's a culture that was born out of many people coming together, sometimes forcibly coming together, but making something beautiful. And the cloth has been around for almost 40 years. And because I'm a Caribbean woman, I like to wear Caribbean jewelry. This is something Samara, and bring color and light and pockets to the world.
So in many cultures, obviously not everywhere, but in many cultures, fashion and clothes making and everything that has to do with garments is considered women's work and therefore a little bit beneath. And even right now, I mean, I'm asking you about fashion and I almost have to excuse it, like why are you talking about as if it's a very frivolous pursuit? But how do you think that fashion can be a tool or a sign of female emancipation? You're mentioning pockets, for instance.
I think in and of itself, when we speak about women's work, we need to value it in the same way in which we value men's work and public work, because we don't always speak about the work in the home in the way in which we speak about the work outside. But fashion has always been about control or empowerment. We spoke a bit earlier on the last panel about The Handmaid's Tale. Margaret Atwood worked and wrote that from things that are happening 40 years ago. It was in the 80s or 70s. 40 years ago, she took it from law, including women's dress was policed. So the chance for us to choose what we wear, how we wear it, when we wear it, is an act of empowerment. So we should be proud to speak about fashion, including in many of the countries we support. For example, in the Ukraine, we have funded 2 lawyers, the way in which women have to recreate themselves in times of war, who created Yari lingerie for women soldiers so that they have comfortable lingerie on the front lines. This is an act of empowerment. This is an act of resistance. And that is what fashion can be. So whether it is our heels or our lipstick or a hijab, we choose what we want to wear and how we wear it. That is empowerment, and we should never be ashamed to celebrate it.
Of course. And that is, in many ways, the way we champion fashion at Marie Claire. So let's talk about the women's, the fund that you're working for. Can you explain exactly what its purpose is and what it is that you do for women around the world in situations of conflict?
Sure. So we just celebrated the General Assembly, and I was in New York, and it was a very interesting, heavy time. But 80 years ago, a woman ensured that we had a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Almost 10 years ago, civil society organizations led by women said we need a fund specifically for women because women know how to create peace, but they don't always have access to the funds or the stages to be able to do so. So what our fund does is we ensure that women like those 2 lawyers in the Ukraine have the money for entrepreneurial activity, have funding for access to self-care, because this mental toll of war is, the tale can never truly be told about that mental toll. We also ensure that women have funds for access to justice, because conflict-related sexual violence is unfortunately rife across many of the countries in the world experiencing conflict. We also are trying to ensure that women are at the peace tables. We keep seeing peace being negotiated, but we're not seeing women in the media on the front lines when we know that when women are at the table for peace negotiations, it lasts longer. This is fact, but we're not ensuring that women are at the table. And then finally, it's just life or death. When I first joined this fund, I met a young woman from Uganda who came and said, "You saved my life." And I said, "It wasn't me." There's a huge team, but what they explained was that we were able to give them funding to be able to get the safety and security they needed to protect their life when their life was at risk. So that's what our fund does. I think it's the best of what the UN can do, and it's very practical.
I like the fact that it's practical.
Yeah.
So you were mentioning Ukraine, and of course there are many conflicts raging around the world right now, but as Europeans, Ukraine hits particularly close to home, as whenever there is a conflict on European soil. And of course, when you see, read books or see movies about the war, it's always the men fighting, the men suffering, and then, of course, women are kind of like secondary casualties of war. But in the Ukrainian army, there are lots of women, for instance. That's a heritage of the very egalitarian way that the Soviet Union treated men and women. And but women are also, of course, more in the back and supporting the army, and they suffer in very specific ways. You mentioned sexual violence, but there are many other ways, and can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, look, right now, first of all, who's on the front line? 68,000 women are in the Ukrainian army. 1,000 of them are fighting on the front lines right now. But beyond that, who's left behind to make sure that the children are being educated, are being fed, that the elderly have the support that they need? It's the women in the society.
Sure.
So we've been supporting over 170 projects in the Ukraine, making sure that these projects are not just a one-off, but they are able to continue to grow and ensure that there is sustainability for the communities that are being supported. We supported one technological project where people could get access to mental health care online, right? Because when you've been in war for that long, depending on where you are in the world, 5, 10 years may not seem long for being in a state of war, but it is a long time. And the insecurity that each and every one of us is feeling every time we open the news. Imagine if we were having drones drop bombs.
Yeah, okay, exactly.
So the mental health care toll is extremely one that needs support. So women are holding down the front lines when it comes to feeding people, Sure. When it comes to ensuring that people still have a sense of safety and home, and also just making sure the economy does not completely collapse while the majority of those on the front line are men. And when it comes to, let's hope this ends soon too, reintegration of the men who have been as well traumatized by war, their wives, their mothers, their aunts, their grandmothers are the ones who are going to be doing that work as well.
Yeah, and who are going to pay the price of the PTSD if it's untreated and things like that.
Exactly.
Another conflict that at the top of everyone's mind, especially today, is what's going on in Palestine.
Yes.
And so what is your fund's involvement in that region?
So we've been in Palestine since 2020, giving support to women's organizations on the ground, also ensuring that women human rights defenders from Palestine have an opportunity to speak on their own behalf, to explain what it is they want for peace. I think we're all tentatively very excited about the potential of peace in the region. Where we are now, and I saw visions yesterday on BBC of many of the hostages coming home. And it moved me because I'm a newish mother, and you think your child goes out to a party, and then
they don't come back.
They don't come back. I can also think about Palestinian mothers. I can think about Israeli mothers and Palestinian mothers and thinking, what does justice mean for both of them now? And if they're not at the table when peace is being negotiated, how do they get to ensure that that is articulated clearly in a long-standing peace? And so we're really trying to make sure now that Palestinian women's voices are heard. And not just one kind of Palestinian women, all Palestinian women who want to be able to have an opportunity to share their voice clearly about what it means for them, what peace means for them now, and justice means for them now, is part of the work that we continue to do.
So I think that now would be a good time to maybe look at the video of the of the new campaign that your fund is launching right now, and then maybe we can talk about it.
Absolutely.
Peace is more than a slogan, more than handshakes and global summits. Peace is not a given, it is a choice we make to honor the threads that connect us all, a choice built in the small and big moments that hold life together, a choice worth striving for. Peace is in the warmth of a shelter after being forced to flee, in a meal shared in silence, in the unseen work of those who serve on the front lines, and in knowing you are not alone. Peace is fueled by women and girls lifting up their communities, men and boys choosing equality in word and deed, by activists speaking their truth in the most difficult circumstances, in decision makers choosing to hear each other and cross divides, in elders and youth coming together, demanding better for each other and themselves. Peace is safety, is economic stability, environmental sustainability. Peace is resilience and resilient. The road to peace can feel exhausting, yet it is the most urgent work of our lifetime, to build on the work of those who came before and to lay the groundwork for those who will come after. Peace is our collective responsibility. It is the promise we owe one another, and it is a promise worth keeping. What is your peace for peace?
So you said earlier that when women are involved in the peace process, it lasts longer, and one of the previous speakers mentioned also the figure of Liz Estrada. And I was wondering if you could expand through your experience and what you've observed about what do women specifically bring in the peacemaking process? Like, how do women bring peace?
So before the 1990s, sexual violence wasn't really addressed as a war crime. That is what women brought to the table, to acknowledge that this is also a crime, and you can't have peace and justice if you don't actually name what the violence and injustice was. So that's one very clear way in which women being at the table changes the narrative. I was lucky enough to listen to Mama Graça Machel, and everybody was just talking about the fact that she was Nelson Mandela's wife. But before being Nelson Mandela's wife, she was a real revolutionary for peace. And when her country was being rebuilt, she and the other women were the ones who were speaking about education, because that was not at the forefront of the reconstruction conversations at the time. I believe, though, and I feel strongly in this, and I agree very clearly with Madam President on this, we need men at the table who are feminist men, transformational thinkers as well, who are making the space and ensuring that the women who are speaking are not speaking alone, right? But we have to ensure that when women are at the table, you have a diversity of perspective. And it's not because women are just innately born differently. I mean, we can have a long conversation on that, sex and biology and all of the rest of it. However, we are socialized into seeing things that are invisible to many who are in power. And that is why you need to create space at those tables for them to speak that truth to power, to ensure that what is peace, because we say it, but what does it mean for each and every one of us? What is peace actually reflects the reality of a population.
Yeah. And women also feel it very closely when they see the children grow up and they see the next generation. What does it mean to have generational peace as well?
I'm reading a book written by Harriet Blanton Stanton in the 1919s after the First World War. And she was pointing out then, and I sometimes worry about humanity, are we learning at all from our past? But everything she says in that book, written in the 1920s, we could take right now. And it was women's observations of the malnourishment of children in Europe based on World War I, and what education has meant, the gap in education has meant. And although COVID feels very far behind, we're still dealing with generations of children in some parts of the world that weren't in school for 1 or 2 years. So really understanding what this means for our health, physically, mentally, and what it means for our future. If you do not have women at the table, you're not having that direct understanding of what it is they're seeing that many of us aren't.
That's true. And so speaking of the future, what do you hope to see happen? What do you hope to achieve through the fund? First of all, short terms in the region that we've discussed, but more generally, like, what's the world you're hoping for? What is your vision of the future?
If I could rewrite the world. First, I think we all have to, if the world came to an understanding that peace is not just the absence of war. We do want to have the absence of war. That is number one. So if the Ukraine, if we can have just the guns down, the bombs stopped, if we can have a ceasefire, a real genuine ceasefire, followed by an inclusive peace process that includes women, that includes minorities, that really reflects the reality of a population, that is what we are really trying to support the world and women in the world in creating. But I think in the long term, and some of the conversations earlier reflected on the notion of where the world is right now, and social media, and all of the rest of it, and how women themselves see themselves within this new reality that we're in. There's a story of Irish shopkeepers, women who ring up the different produce. And in the 80s, one of them, they were so tired of how poorly they were being treated by their bosses that they refused to ring up a grapefruit that was grown in South Africa because of apartheid. And they didn't really know what apartheid meant, but they just felt, I need to stand on something. They stood on something, and it was uncomfortable for them for multiple years. And their action led to Ireland banning all imports from apartheid South Africa, the first country in the Western world to do it. What I would like to see is all of us recognizing we're connected in our triumphs and in our struggles. When I listen to all of these incredible Greek women speak about the realities here, I see the Caribbean, I see the United States, I see the countries across Europe and Latin America I get to visit. But we are so detached, we're connected but detached. If we can find a way through cinema, through theater, through books, but also through listening to one another, even when it's uncomfortable, even when we disagree, without demonizing the other, we can get to some kind of internal and community-based peace where we decide these are some of the key things we are going to stand with through comfort and discomfort to an end.
Well, we can only hope, and hopefully spaces like this and conversations like this are a first step in the right direction, that we can actually listen to each other.
Yeah, and we can look fabulous while we do it, you know? But we were talking about it, and it's something that's bothered me for the past 5 years. There's so many things you're curious about, but you're afraid to even ask because you don't know if you're going to get canceled for asking the question. We need to be able to be uncomfortable with someone else's perspective if we want big peace. The small peace, even amongst us women, just trying to understand that our differences should not divide us, but they give us so much more to be able to build upon for a future for everyone.
Thank you so much, and we can only hope that it comes true within our lifetimes.
I would hope for our children, I mean.
Yeah, well, at least for our children.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Tonni.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure.